All right, so we have a new topic today. Today we're going to be talking about economic systems. This is going to be part of the first unit, and it's going to attach at the end of the first unit the way we did. So I want you to, before I even tell you about economic systems, I want you to think about the feelings that these words provoke. Capitalism, communism, socialism. Maybe you have positive or negative feelings about any or all of these. I want you to just tell me how they make you feel right off the bat. And what do you know about these economic systems? So pause the video so that you can answer these questions before I go on and tell you what we mean by economic systems. So this is not actually going to be the definition in your notes, but economic systems organize the way society provides the needs and wants of the people. In other words, the definition of economic system is the method used by a society to produce and distribute goods or services. So that is going to be the definition. Or how the government tells us what we can get or how to get it. So examples of economic systems include capitalism, socialism, and communism. These are ways that the government is going to interact with the economy and make decisions that are going to drive the economy forward. So there's a few different types of economic systems, and no, that's actually not capitalism and communism and socialism. These are going to be categories that those economic systems fit into. So remember, all economic systems must answer the three basic questions. What are they? What goods and services to produce? How will they produce them? And who will produce them? This is sort of a review. We've already talked about this in the last notes. But when I asked you if you were starting a business, what would you produce? How would you produce it? And for whom will you produce it? Economic systems seek to answer those questions, and they're going to answer them in different ways. So every economic system will answer these questions in a different way, starting with the three basic types of economic systems. Number one is going to be a traditional economy. A traditional economy is going to be thought of as a pre-industrial revolution economy. We still have some modern day traditional economies that I'll talk about in a little bit, but in a traditional economy, and what's going to distinguish a traditional economy as a traditional economy, the economic questions, what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, are answered by habits and customs. In other words, the way it always has been done. They often involve bartering goods and services. So maybe if I own a chicken farm and you own a dairy farm, I will trade eggs for butter. That would be an example of bartering goods and services instead of having a currency. This would not work in a large scale the way we have in the United States, but it might work in a small individual community. Oftentimes, children work the same jobs as their parents. So maybe farming or hunter-gathering, trades. Think about back in the day when there was a blacksmith and a tailor and a butcher and a farmer, and everybody had their own job and they would trade back and forth. That's basically what a traditional economy is. They often fear change. And modern day examples include Eskimos, the Amish, Pygmies, Bush people, et cetera, et cetera. Think about an Amish community. They are pretty insulated as a community, and they are going to each have their role. They're going to fear technology and change, and they're going to barter amongst one another. So that is a traditional economy. That's not going to be the modern thing that we're going to focus too much on, but that's sort of going to be a separate economy that's sort of off to the side. Next, we have a command economy. Now, the defining characteristic of a command economy is that the government answers the basic economic questions. So in a command economy, what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, those questions are answered by the government. There are advantages to this. Advantages include they can act quickly in emergencies, provide for all people equally. Unfortunately, the disadvantages usually outweigh the advantages. So we're talking about communist countries such as China and the former Soviet Union. And if we're talking about the advantages, well, everybody's equal in the former Soviet Union, except everybody's equally poor. That's why 100 million people starved to death in communist regimes in the 20th century, between mostly the Soviet Union and China, but also Cuba, North Vietnam, for example. These are in North Korea. These are examples of communist command economies. So disadvantages: selfish leaders, no freedom of choice, inefficient, low quality goods, no incentive to work hard or be creative. Those are all definitive disadvantages. So what you might have in a command economy, if we're talking about the Soviet Union, for example, you might have a situation where if you have a theory of the world that comes from this belief that all all economics is power, and it's a power struggle between the workers and the owners of capital. Then what you're going to say is, imagine that there is a farmer who's doing a great job in growing their potatoes. And they are growing potatoes. They're a successful potato farmer. Well, if everybody is either an oppressor or an oppressed, in that case, the successful potato farmer is, by definition, oppressing somebody. And so what happened in the Soviet Union is that successful farmer was thrown into the gulags, and they put a new unsuccessful farmer in their place. And that unsuccessful farmer now was tasked with growing food for the people. And you were either successful, in which case you were an oppressor, or you were unsuccessful, in which case you got to keep your job. But by keeping your job, you were not able to feed all the people. And so everybody was equally poor. Also, people were understanding that, you know what, if I'm supposed to grow 1,000 potatoes this week, and I'm a potato farmer, and I grow 2,000 potatoes this week, well, I don't get anything extra. In fact, if I keep any extra, if I grow, 1,010, and I give my 1,000 potatoes up, but I don't keep and I keep those extra 10, well, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to be thrown in the gulag. So there's no incentive to go above and beyond. There's no profit motive. Without the incentive to work hard or be creative, then nothing additional is going to be produced. So no freedom of choice. And that was also a problem, is that people didn't have the freedom to choose what to do with their own labor, what to do with their own time, what to do with their own capital resources. So unfortunately, that would lead to low quality goods and lack of innovation. So examples include communist countries, former communist countries such as China, Vietnam, North Korea, former Soviet Union, and Cuba, or modern day socialist countries such as Venezuela. Venezuela did a very similar thing, where they decided that the oil reserves under the ground in Venezuela were the property of all the people. Great, fine. But they built their economy around selling those oil reserves to everybody else. And so everything about Venezuela became socialist. They became socialist in that the community and the collective owned everything, and the government answered the questions of what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. And so the answer was that they were going to drill for oil, and they were going to sell that to developed nations in the rest of the world, and then they were going to split the profits among the people. What happened, though, is that in an economy with no competition and no incentive to work hard or be creative, Venezuela became dependent on that oil. And when they became dependent on that oil, all it took was the price of oil to collapse, or countries like the United States starting to drill for their own oil. And once that happened, there was all of a sudden no money in Venezuela. And now you can go to Venezuela and people are literally eating their own dogs to survive because there's no food. They're fleeing Venezuela as fast as they possibly can. The other problem with that is that when everything has to go from the workers up to the government in order to be redistributed by the government, well, the members of the government might distribute everything completely and equally and fairly, but that's honestly not what happens. Usually, the members of the government take all that they want and then they redistribute. So maybe if I'm the leader of that government, I get 100% of the products, and then I take 10% for myself and then distribute 90% to all the rest of the people. And that diminishes the amount that are going to all the other people. So those are some of the real concerns of socialism and communism. Socialism is not what people say when they're talking about socialism in our modern day politics. They're not talking about European socialism or democratic socialism. All that they mean when they say socialism in those ways are increased spending and increase taxes by the government. So the government is going to increase taxes, and they're going to include programs like socialized medicine or socialized college or socialized school or social security or whatever. All of these things are not actually socialism. In socialism, the government owns everything, and the people don't own their own labor. That's what socialism is. The government answers those three questions. There's really no difference between socialism and communism that is a material, markable difference in any real way. Socialism is just a step towards communism. And so we're going to look at a scale and how those things sort of interact. That is a command economy, and to move quickly to free market economy. Free market economy, the economic questions are answered by individual buyers and sellers. Buyers and sellers make up the market. So in a market economy, it is the market that answers the three questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Supply and demand influence the economy. If demand for a product is high, then prices will go up. If supply for a product is high, then prices will go down. And that is how prices are determined. People act out of self-interest, motive for profit, which is money, drives the economy. So you could say that greed drives the economy, and you might be right, but you could also say that that iPhone that you have is only a result of individuals trying to get rich. Steve Jobs wants to get rich. He wants to create the best product. He has answers to his shareholders. His shareholders are putting money into his company because they believe that he is going to make them rich. And by doing that, it allows him to have the proper incentive in order to create the iPhone. If there's no incentive, then there's no iPhone. Okay, so you can have a problem with capitalism, but you can't do it from your iPhone. You can't post on Twitter from your iPhone about how much you hate capitalism, because you are engaging in capitalism in both instances. If you really hated capitalism, you would stop using the benefits of capitalism. So this is also known as free enterprise and capitalism. Examples include the United States, Western Europe, Japan. In this class, most of the principles that we're learning are the principles that work in a free market system. In a command system, we're not going to learn most of those principles. Most of those principles are going to be different. They're just not going to work in the same way. So those are the three. We have traditional economy, command economy, and free market economy. But wait, I lied. There's actually a fourth. There are four types of economic systems, and the last one is a mixed economy. And that is because no economy is a pure market, pure command, or pure traditional economy. Elements of each appear in all economies. Some have more of one economy than others. So even if you're talking about an Amish community, you can go to the Amish community and buy a blanket using your American cash. Okay, you can do that. So they're not completely isolated from the rest of everything. But also, we talk about this chart. Every country in the world is going to fall somewhere on this chart. So you might have a country like the United States or Japan over here that leans more capitalist, but there's going to be elements of the American economy that are going to be command in nature. So it's going to be mixed, right? We have the elements where you own your wages, but guess what? You're still taxed by the government. You're still subject to their regulations, and they're still going to create social programs. And the government, in some ways, is going to answer the questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. They do that through politics. They do that through electing Republicans who are going to answer what to produce question as the military, and they elect Democrats who are going to answer the what to produce question with healthcare, right? So they're going to have different ways of answering those different questions, and how much to spend on money or on healthcare and how much to spend on the military are going to be questions that are going to be disagreed upon between Republicans and Democrats. So if we are here right now, Republicans are going to want to push us closer over here to the pure market, to the pure competition, free market. And Democrats are going to want to push us over here towards France, Sweden. That's why Democrats use words like socialism, and why Republicans use words like socialism, because we're going to be moving over here towards socialism if we move further to the left. Now, the United States is not anywhere close to being socialist like China or Venezuela, but they might be moving this direction if that's the way Democrats want. They want higher taxes and higher spending to be maybe more like France or Sweden. So maybe Democrats want to move us over here and Republicans want to move us over here. That's what a tax cut would do. It would move us to the right on this spectrum. A tax raise and a spending increase would move us to the left on the spectrum. Countries like France and Sweden, they're not socialist. You own your labor in France and Sweden, but you own it to a much lesser degree. If you're paying 50, 60, 70% taxes, like some of those European socialists, and I put that in air quotes, countries, then you only own 40% of your labor. If you're paying a 60% tax rate, the government owns 60% of your labor, you own 40%. Yes, it's better than in China or Venezuela where they own 100%, or especially in North Korea where they own 100% and you don't have any chance of having any say about anything. Okay. So if you're talking about France, maybe in France you own 40% of your labor and the government owns 60%. So it's 60% socialist and 40% capitalist. And in the United States, you own, if you pay a 25% tax rate, for example, you own 75% of your labor and the government pays 25%. So increasing taxes is what pushes us to the left on this spectrum. And everything is somewhere mixed in between. But in order to understand the mixed economy, you first have to understand pure free market and a pure planned economy.